and a lack of confidence in political parties' ability to work together for the greater good of society. 3 months later, despite the disagreements over the BELA bill and the NHI bill, the GNU is still standing. Should all doubts about the GNU cast aside, or is the 3 months a little too soon to have a concise outlook? So let's now speak to lecturer at the Central University of Technology and political commentator, Leeto Nthoba, who's joining us this morning to weigh in on this. Leeto, very good morning to you. Thank you so much for making time for us. What's your assessment of the government of national unity? I know that some political parties prefer not using that term. They prefer just saying that it is a coalition. But what's your assessment of how these 10 political parties have fared so far?
For me, I think it's a little bit too early to give a full assessment of their performance, right? Because they're not just coming out of a blank canvas, right? We're coming from this background of a sort of immature engagement in the South African political landscape in general. So if you think about it, there's still the same one-upmanship that we are seeing across the board in South African politics, right? But also, we still see the sort of temper tantrum that would come from immature political parties, especially when you're talking about the conflict with the BELA bill, right? The minister doesn't attend the signing and sort of just shrugs everything off instead of meaningfully engaging and trying to sort out the nuances, right? But also, the people around the BELA bill, right? Even those inside the GNU, also still trying to sort of give like these hyperbole statements about how this is going to it's tantamount to genocide and civil war and all of these things that aren't true. And so it also shows that the same lack of maturity that we saw before the GNU was formed still exists inside the South African political space. And I think going forward, we're going to start moving away from the showmanship and the one-upsmanship and actually talking about nuanced conversations, especially about bills and especially about policy positions that South Africa that's going to need to take South Africa forward, especially in the tough times that are to come in South Africa politically.
Yeah. So would you say that we are still within the so-called honeymoon phase?
We still are in the honeymoon phase, right? We're still in the phase of Gayton McKenzie pandering to Cyril Ramaphosa, throwing jabs at the EFF whenever Cyril Ramaphosa is next to him. And so none of it is still going to giving the South African end user of the political system whatever it is that they need from the political system. And so we're still in the honeymoon phase, but also we're still in the growing pains phase, right? Where one thing is said inside the GNU, Helen Zille comes and says something else, Fikile Mbalula says something else, and then 2 weeks later, some kind of clarity comes. And I think that those kinds of hiccups are the ones that that still prohibit us from having a full picture of what the GNU is really capable of. And I think in that instance, we don't know what the GNU is fully capable of, but also we don't know how low the GNU can fall. And I think this mid-space we're in, it leaves room for a lot of speculation.
Yeah. When I interviewed Helen Zille after the elections, and we spoke about some of the issues that the Democratic Alliance had, and this was following the appointment of the ministers who would form part of the GNU. She mentioned, and I asked her about the BELA bill, and she said, as far as the DA is concerned, that is a red line for them. They had mentioned this to the ANC before, so the ANC is clear on that. And then comes the day that the president is supposed to sign the bill. The Minister of Basic Education, who is essentially the custodian, supposed to implement what is in the act, absconding and deciding not to attend that signing, to such a point where then the president decides that 2 clauses will then be suspended. What does this tell us about the level of debate then that happens within cabinet when it comes to these, when it comes to decisions that need to be taken where there is a difference of opinion?
I think not just the level of debate, right, but the level of understanding. If you're in a grand coalition like you are in the GNU, there are no red line or hard line issues that you can say, oh, this is where we draw the line, this is where we're going to leave. Because if Helen Zille were to think that the BELA bill would be a red line, what happens then if the red line is crossed? Because it is crossed. the president has signed the BELA bill into action, even though those two clauses are hung up, it's just for engagement purposes. Those two bills will come to fruition one day in these next 5 years. And so what do you mean? And so that would have been a great question. What do you mean red line? What do you do if the red line is crossed? Because in a grand coalition, hard lines are necessarily going against exactly what you set forward in something like the GNU. Everybody, because you coalesce, you decide that there is a soft line between each and every issue that you assume you had. And that soft line can be traversed through nuanced debates and a give and take kind of relationship.
Yep.
If you don't understand that, then the debates are going to be very low level, very low energy debates, because at the end of the day, you can't fulfill the needs of the country while trying to showmanship and have hardline arguments or red line issues that you don't want to traverse.
Yeah.
If you're doing that, it means you are looking out for the party and not the people who voted you in anyway.
When you look at what you call the Grand Coalition, it almost seems as though that there are two senior parties to the Grand Coalition, the ANC and the Democratic Alliance. Then you have and the other political parties that form part of the so-called Grand Coalition. What do you think happens to their voices in cabinet? Because publicly as well, they are not as loud as the ANC as well as the Democratic Alliance, and he's speaking also about the IFP.
Yeah, you look at parties like the IFP, they're very, very muted, right? And have not taken up a position on who they're going to be in the GNU. And this was a great concern, right? If you are a small party inside the GNU, who do you become in the shadow of these two giants who in and of themselves have giant personalities within, that people would digress to listening to those giant personalities instead of you, right? And I think that's the one question that we're going to see as the Grand Coalition matures. But remember, parties like the Freedom Front Plus have already decided who they are in this equation. And I think a lot of people forget who the Freedom Front Plus wants to be in this Grand Coalition. One, they understand it's a position of consolidating power, especially in the base that they were losing or that they were having a tug of war with the Democratic Alliance, right? But then secondly, they also decided to be the most academic part of the GNU, right? If you are listening to how talks inside the GNU go and the ebb and flow of talks, you'll understand that they put themselves in a central position to make sure that they uphold the principles of a soft line coalition in order to achieve goals. And by doing that, they become the adult in the South African political landscape. And that's going to be very beneficial for them, especially with their voter base, as they try to siphon off voters from the DA, from the ACDP, who have traditionally siphoned off the Afrikaner Christian vote away from them in trying to consolidate power. And I think most parties must now decide who they are in the GNU in order for them to start taking up that posture in making themselves better, or else they're going to drown.
Well, if you look at what happened now in the city of Tshwane, I'd argue and say that that's the position as well. That the Freedom Front Plus would have wanted to take, but the fallout around it, the Democratic Alliance issuing a statement saying that Action SA enables, quote, anti-GNU power grab of Tshwane. So it seems, though, that where the Democratic Alliance is not happy, it then characterizes that as an anti-GNU sentiment, and we know the decision that has been taken in Gauteng, where it is, of course, a hung provincial legislature, a minority government, and that minority government excludes the Democratic Alliance. What should we read into what's playing out in Tshwane and also this characterization of an anti-GNU sentiment?
Right. And I think the DA in particular has sort of played themselves into such a tough corner when they had such a strong negotiating position, right? With the temper tantrums, with the ministers not pitching up for a signing. All of this makes them look like a weak political party that can't negotiate their way into things, right? That they want to bully their way into things. And if you're not with them, you're anti-GNU, right? understanding, with the lack of understanding, it also shows like a grand lack of understanding from the DA. Because remember, the ANC had not taken a resolution at Congress about this thing. They still have to go fight about that inside the ANC. And so it's not across the board that they accept the GNU, especially in places like Gauteng, the Free State, these volatile places where the ANC knows they have to consolidate power since they've lost so much power in KZN and the Western Cape. And so all of these things means that the DA doesn't do its political calculations well, but also doesn't engage in good faith, because once they do, they would have proven to be the ultimate negotiator in these kind of processions and made themselves out to be the party that South Africa must look to. Instead, they look like the immature party that we once saw the EFF as in the days where they would throw a fit at the beginning of parliament and leave the parliamentary precinct. And I think they're now taking up the same posture with that inside the GNU, and this is making them look very, very bad. And I think they really need to reconsider their strategy when it comes to negotiation inside the GNU, and even in places where they could engage the ANC and other parties.
Leeto, just briefly, the results of the Government of National Unity has meant that the third biggest political party in Parliament, the MK, becomes the official opposition. Do you think that the official opposition has been effective as an opposition party and also having to deal with oversight?
I don't think so, because the MK as the official opposition is shaky at best, right? Because it's trying to take up the position of the raucuses inside the party. The EFF has whittled down to a question mark more than a force to be reckoned with when it comes to economic emancipation of the people as they had put themselves forward. And I think that kind of disarray was not one that we expected, especially from the opposition. We expected that there would be a whole lot more infighting and shifting inside the GNU in general. And I think the MK is going to go through a tumultuous period, because if you think about it, the MK was formed as almost a grassroots movement inside the KZN, disgruntled people, right? And so now, strangely enough, you don't pick from those people who were the ground forces, for the lack of a better term. You then start to pick from the superstars from the outside, right? You get the Brian Molefes, you get the Mzwanele Manyis, and once you do that, you are taking away from what the essence of the party was. And so it's actually going to spring a new identity, and I want to see if the voters would go with that new identity that doesn't seem to have the lifeblood of the KZN in mind. And I think that's going to be one of their faults that could rupture the party.
Leeto, thank you so much for your time. Lecturer at the Central University of Technology and political commentator there, Leeto Nthoba.